It has been 135 days since the Taliban took over Kabul. With each passing day, the group is now taking Afghanistan back to the 1990s. Rights and liberties of women are being snatched away one at a time. But the Afghan women are not ready to give up just yet. Their jobs, education, freedoms, rights and all that they enjoyed for the last 20 years, this time they have taken the fight in their own hands. Women in Afghanistan have been protesting in closed spaces and out on the streets, especially in Kabul. They have reached out to the international community to expose the harsh ground reality. And the proof of Taliban's mindset towards the women has been caught on camera. In a video shared on social media, Taliban members can be seen firing in the air to intimidate and disperse women protesters in Kabul. The protesting women were calling for equal rights, reopening of higher education institutes for women, freedom to work and participate in political life in the country. But the Taliban leaders used guns to silence the protesting women. The protest was staged outside the Ministry for the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice. The ministry is headquartered at the site where once Afghanistan's Women's Welfare Ministry stood. The protest comes just days after the Taliban issued a bizarre diktat disallowing women from travelling alone for long distances. The diktat says that women should not be offered road transport for more than 72 kilometres unless and until they are accompanied by a close male relative. Women's rights activists have sharply criticised these guidelines. A few weeks ago, the Taliban banned the broadcast of soap operas and movies featuring women and mandated hijabs for female journalists. Afghanistan's education minister's latest remarks also sparked a huge controversy. Minister Abdul Baqi Haqqani called for the end of co-education in the country, saying that it goes against Islamic values. A day after taking over Kabul, the Taliban, in their first news briefing, struck a reconciliatory tone and projected a more moderate image back then. They promised women of education and jobs in accordance with Islamic law, but the reality has been starkly opposite of what they promised. Girls are being barred from high school education. Women don't have the freedom to work or freedom of movement. They are still not a part of the inclusive government that the Taliban earlier promised. To make things worse, the Taliban is now adding bizarre regressive rules to the list of existing ones, curtailing women's rights and freedoms. Now, for more on this, our Pakistan Bureau Chief Anas Malik now joins us live from Islamabad. Anas, thanks for joining us. You, of course, have reported for WION from the heart of the conflict in Afghanistan earlier. So what more can you tell us about these protests and the subsequent reports of the Taliban gunfire on women protesters?
Well, you're absolutely right. WION has been extensively reporting from Afghanistan, not for the first time. We've been there for a while, and I was there reporting for over 3.5 months. Now, this protest that happened today, it took place at the heart of the city. It's called Shahri-Naw, right in front of the road that leads towards the presidential palace. So it's an intersection. The intersection on the right is the presidential palace, and towards the left is where the road leads towards the center of the city, that is called Shahri-Naw. That is where this protest took place, where women came out in numbers demanding their basic rights, demanding the right to education, demanding food, and also protesting against the absurd orders that were put out on the 26th of December that had barred women to travel with a male in case if they're traveling longer than 72 kilometers. Now that has seen sharp criticism from all quarters on the Taliban, but the Taliban don't seem to budge down. This protest was met with the use of force of the Taliban because they've been trying to portray their mighty might by using force in order to disperse. And as a result of this, at least 2 protesters were injured as well. Priyanka?
Anas, thanks for those inputs. Stay with us on this broadcast. We want to now cut across to Washington, D.C., from where Mariam Wardak now joins us live. Mariam Wardak happens to be the founder of Her Afghanistan. Mariam, thanks so much for joining us on WION at this hour. Now, my question to you, we just saw those disturbing visuals coming in from Afghanistan. Women, brave women at that, protesting against the Taliban's diktats. They're demanding better rights to education, to work. And this comes at a time when the Taliban is going on to kind of put bizarre guidelines to women's travel, their right to work, their right to education. And there also seems to be an appeal from women to the international community. But is anyone listening?
Well, Priyanka, there's a few things that we need to look at, and this is the behavior of protesters in Afghanistan. I think that these young women are very brave to come outside, but is it the appropriate measures to take, especially with such a harsh administration? In 2015, when President Ghani was in power, there was a Hazara genocide that took place. 12 people were kidnapped and killed. And when the Hazaras decided to protest in front of President Ghani's palace, their guards also shot at the protesters, injuring 7. And in 2020, the same thing happened when Governor Sarwar of Badakhshan his guards opened fire on protesters who wanted clean water. So there has been a behavioral pattern of protesters and getting shot at in Afghanistan in the past century or so. And this is not the right approach. I think that we need to pressure the international community to communicate with the Taliban on the rights and access to women's economic, health, and education opportunity, because we are in this position because of the international community. The international community is who has given legitimacy to the Taliban. Due to the withdrawal of the international community, the Taliban are in power. And due to the withdrawal, the nation is in pain right now. Why are in the pain? You have women who lost their jobs, women who do not have any type of economic independence or liberty to move around the nation freely. And one of the things that many people have lost information about is the fact that many of the households have now turned into matriarchs due to the intense fighting that has occurred over 40 plus years.
Absolutely. Mariam, I just want to follow up that question. You say that this is not the right approach. Are you worried about these women who are taking to the streets, protesting against the Taliban at a time when the Taliban clearly is using gunfire in the air to disperse protests? Do you worry about their safety?
Absolutely. I've always worried about protesters, whether it was the Karzai's Ghani administration or the Taliban administration, because there are violent aspects in Afghanistan. You have the criminal aspects that can be as a facade as the Taliban and maybe kidnap or abuse women. And then you have the Taliban who use harsh measures to govern in Afghanistan. And then you have the society. We have to also reflect about 6 years ago when Farkhunda protested against Islamic religious leader, and there was a mob attack against her because she challenged a religious authority. So there is anger, there is a famine, there is frustration, and the nation is just in a crisis. So I feel like these women could be the unfortunate incident and outlet for these individuals to go after. So this is not an appropriate approach from my perspective.
Right, Mariam Wardak, thank you so much for all those inputs, and thank you for joining us on WION from Washington, D.C. We now cut across to our Pakistan Bureau Chief, who is still with us on this broadcast from Islamabad, Anas Malik. Anas, my next question to you, this development that we're now focusing on comes after the Taliban said that women cannot travel long distances without a close male relative to accompany them. So will we see more such protests in the future in the country? And the biggest question is, how will the international community respond? If at all, for that matter?
Well, the international community has been responding very harshly against the decision by the Taliban, including we saw comments coming in from the Pakistani information minister as well, terming it as a retrogressive measure. But the reality in Afghanistan remains that women continue to function or to remain under those shackles of slavery, it won't be wrong to say, under the Taliban, because the Taliban have been very, very repressive. they're not allowed to go out to work, they're not allowed to go to schools, and now this travel ban itself, which basically bars them to travel beyond 72 kilometers unless they're accompanied by a male. Now, the international community would be having their part of reservations as well, and they would be relayed to the Taliban. The Taliban have already had this roadblock with regards to international recognition, which they are desperate for, and this roadblock has been that they need to ensure rights to women. And with these retrogressive measures, they certainly don't have that. They don't seem serious on the part of recognition, and that is something the international community is going to clearly take note about. Priyanka?
Right, Anas Malik, our Pakistan Bureau Chief, thank you so much for joining us on WION The World. Thanks for all those inputs.
WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.